Yep.
I will.
I'll double check. Everything looks good.
Yep, I have those little up and down lines. It looks like I'm giving myself an EKG here, so
It means that you're alive, man. I
it
think
means that it's going, I guess. Yeah.
that's cool. Okay, guys. So let's start. So we have been contacted by your publisher, the Prometheus book last year, and they asked us if we will be happy to have you on the podcast and to talk about your book, which is Let's Talk About Death, right? And obviously we said, well, give us first the book just to read and to make sure that they are not like crazy right-wing Christians, thinking about there's an afterlife and we need to talk about God and all this kind of stuff, because this is not what we are doing. And I read your book, and you're not this crazy right-wing Christians talking about God. You are part of our community, I guess, because we love to talk about death ourselves in this podcast. We had John Underwood, who is the founder of the Death Cafe, before here.
Well, I'm going to interrupt already there because, my husband is Swiss, so I spend a lot of time in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And whoever you're talking about is not the founder of the Death Cafe. That's a Swiss man named Bernard Crétat, and it was Café Mortel. And he did literally hundreds and over 1,000 eventually, including in Switzerland, Belgium, so in France as well. And then other people heard about it and started to do it too. So I just want to straighten out that we go on record by saying...
Jesus Christ, Irene, don't start.
The founder, well, you told me to interrupt, plus the founder of the Café Mortel is Bernard Crétat. Okay. He's still alive, and he lives in Switzerland. He's an elderly man.
Yeah, actually, I believe that John Underwood met this guy. So it's... Well, when I say he founded the Death Cafe, I think it's the movement behind that, like meaning that this process to meet, and to have this discussion around death everywhere, Okay, let's not go.
They're popping up everywhere. They're all over this area now too. Churches,
Steve and I have bumped into 4 or 5 people who claim to be the founder of the Death Cafe. I can date it. I have dates available. Anyway.
Okay, so you're not the founders, right? Fine.
We're not the founders.
Okay, you're not claiming. Okay,
we
fine.
did the first one in our area, but we're not the founders.
Fine. We improved upon it, but...
Yes, okay, so John is a lovely guy. Okay, fine. So I love the guy, and it was funny. And we had also Norma Bowie and Erika Ayasaki on the podcast, who they wrote this book, which is Death Class. Norma Bowie is this professor who has one of this class who is teaching about death, and her class is fully booked for the next 3 years. Basically, there's a waiting list for 3 years on this class. So there's something going on around this subject, and I personally love this subject, not in a dark way, not in this gothic thing. It's not like this. For me, talking about death, it's really about life, right? And this is why you're here, I guess, because this is what I found out in your book. Okay, it's not about the afterlife and all this kind of stuff. It's about we are mortal, all mortal here, and death has, for me, there's a meaning behind that. There's a function for us. Okay, and happy for you to be here. So,
thank you.
Welcome to this program, and sorry, Irene. We already started with this debate. I think it will be like a fight between you and me. No, I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, so can you talk a little bit about this book, your book? Let's Talk About Death. Because there's a story behind this book. It's a conversation. It's an email exchange between yourself, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah.
And it transformed into something else, right? Into this book. So can you just give us the background of this project of yours?
Sure. And Steve, you can interrupt. I mean, I'll give you the short version first, which is that I first found out about Steve because 2 friends of mine had been murdered, and on the 1-year anniversary of their death, we were we meaning the friends and family of the people who were murdered, they were husband and wife, wanted to do something to counter what we knew would be the attention on the perpetrators of the crime. So we contacted the local newspaper. Would they be willing to publish our stories about these people as they lived? So that kind of goes with your theme, right? We wanted people to think about how wonderful they were as human beings, not just to think about them as victims of violent crime. And Steve happened to be the Sunday editor of that paper at the time. It's called the Valley News. And he said, yes, I'll publish it. And he was very cooperative. And this was in very great contrast to other journalists I personally had contact with who were only interested in the dramatic, violent, scurrilous side of murder. So I was very appreciative and noted his name, but we didn't meet at the time. And then quite a few years later in that same paper, I read an article and I said, wait a second, I know that guy. And it was Steve Gordon. And Steve Gordon, it turned out, had changed career. He was working as a massage therapist and he had started a nonprofit organization. And I'll let Steve say something about that. Steve, why don't you just you started Hand to Heart in 2008, is that right?
2007. Yeah, 2007. I had started working as a massage therapist back in the 99, I think. And with no clear idea of what type of massage I was going to focus on. But right about the time I was starting, I had 3 people in my circle of awareness who were diagnosed with cancer. And I got to be close to them in 3 very different ways, but they all sort of brought my focus to working with that group. I started doing massage at the local medical center, the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, once a week with patients there, along with still having my newspaper job and having a private massage practice, a regular massage practice too. But I kept thinking it would be really nice to be able to do this for people when they were home from the hospital, either going home to die or going home to recover from the often pretty difficult treatment for cancer. So it's through a roundabout way, I managed at some point to get this nonprofit program called the Hand to Heart Project off the ground, which provides a free in-home massage. We call it Massage and Compassionate Touch, with people who are dying of cancer or living with cancer and treatment. And it was an article right after I left the paper. I started the program, and then I left the paper, and then the paper wrote an article about me, and that's the article that Irene saw, which sort of brought us back together.
There were 2 things that really impressed me about it. One was that he had made this mid-career switch, which is not that easy for people to do. And I was impressed by that, but also that he, in doing this nonprofit work, wanted to help also caretakers. And at that time in my life, I already knew very intimately caretakers of very, very ill people, because all these very, very ill people were related to me. So I had my mother-in-law post-stroke, my father post-major car accident, my brother-in-law with a very serious fatal disease. So members of all branches of my family were taking care of other members of my family. And I thought to myself, wow, that's so great to think about caretakers too. So I sent off a check to the organization, and we still didn't meet. But then I realized, in an effort that I make as a teacher to have my college students learn about local nonprofits, I could ask Steve, would he be willing to talk to some of my students? And he said yes. And so that brought us in contact again, all this all over email, which becomes a theme for Steve and me. Even when we're close together, we conduct a lot of business on email. But in any case, when I began to approach the 10-year anniversary of the murders of my friends, I was very depressed because of all these ill people, and thinking about anniversaries are usually tough for people. And so I mentioned that in an email to Steve, and he said, well, I have these tapes, they're called actually CDs at this point, but it's called Being with Dying. Maybe you would like to listen to that. And so I spent an entire month of February in 2011 just driving around this area, which is pretty snowy and cold in February. Every time I was in my car, I would hear these tapes. And actually, just so we can get the religious part worked out, a lot of stuff that's been written about Death and Dying is written by Buddhists or people who say that they're Buddhists. And I have, in fact, been raised as a Christian. I don't think I'm a fanatical, off the charts, irrational Christian, but I am a Christian. And so some parts of this did not sit that well with me. And when I returned them to Steve, I said, this was great, but maybe we'll talk about it sometime. And that talk basically launched an actual meeting face-to-face. And it was so wonderful to be able to talk about subjects related to mortality without thinking that the other person was crazy or depressed or going off the deep end, that I asked Steve if we could continue talking on email because I was going to be leaving the country. So that's what happened. And eventually we felt like those emails might be shared to benefit with other people. And there obviously was some reorganizing and continuation of the writing, etc. But that's how the book came into being, basically.
Yeah. And to me, this is an extraordinary conversation that you have, because it's not, talking about death like you do in your book, which is like a recurrent subject, and you did this email exchange for how many years, actually?
4 years.
For 4 years. And that was actually the central theme, all this exchange, And to me, it's when I read the book, it's never depressing, actually. It's something which is, it's always, it's you look at this topic from different angles, but you never go into the deep down. It's always with lots of curiosity and lots of research. Try to understand what it's all about. And I love the rhythm, because you, Steve, you're very funny. You're really, you have this humor, and you, Irene, you're more analytical, logical, I guess, something like that. You're a professor, by the way. I didn't introduce you. You see, I'm not professional.
That's
at all.
Okay, no problem.
But you're a professor of German studies and comparative literature, so don't ask me what it's all about, because I'm too dumb. But this kind of exchange between two styles, that drawed me a lot, And how did you actually adjust to you? Because you're two different characters, right? And how
we think that's actually what works. What started out, when we first started the writing exchange, the idea was we would write back and forth. We just had this wonderful conversation, so there was no time to really meet again and keep doing that over time. And so with Irene leaving the country, we decided to move the conversation to the internet. But the idea was, maybe we'll collaborate on something, but let's exchange writing for a while to see what rises to the surface that's of interest to both of us that we might pursue. And it was really after we had done that for about a year that we looked back at what we'd been doing and thought, maybe actually this is the collaboration, the book. And what I've always liked about it, and Irene and I have said this, I think both of us before, is we are incredibly different. We're going to be joined a couple of times here, I think, by my cat, who keeps climbing up into my lap.
What's his name?
Little Callie.
Okay.
She's wandered off now.
That's okay.
Anyway, we're incredibly different people in a lot of ways. We have different writing styles. We have different family and religious backgrounds. We have, I think you would appreciate, very different styles of how we write and think. And that, to my mind, is what I thought was going to really make it an interesting book to read. And that's what I keep hearing from people. I have clients of my massage practice and friends who, one of the first things they say when they talk to me about the book is how engaged they were by the conversation and how different the two of us were, and how we'd come together and then we'd come apart again, because sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, but it's all about the exploration. And it's let's talk about death, but it's really, let's talk about life.
Excellent.
As mortal beings who will eventually die.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the one other thing, Steve, when I reflect back on it, I think that first conversation was so open, and we did cover so many different topics. So we developed some kind of basic trust with each other. But specifically when we tried to write, I think because we thought this was just a prelude to something else, we gave ourselves permission to kind of write anything. So we decided we wanted to be very non-judgmental, just put it out there what we were actually thinking, rather than, couching it by what we thought the other person wanted to hear, or even what we thought a publisher might want to hear. We really said, let's just lay it all out there. And so to give you a very tough example, because I love this person very, very much, I write a lot about my brother-in-law, who was not so many years older than I was, but had this horrible disease. And he made certain kinds of decisions that I was watching the impact of on my sister and my two nieces. And sometimes I felt like I had to question, was he paying enough attention to how his decisions were affecting his family? Mm-hmm. I admired his desire to live. I thought that was really cool because I think it is about life and living life to its fullest. But sometimes specific decisions he made affected my family very, very much in what I perceived it adverse ways that I couldn't have make sense with the fact that I knew he loved them. So it wasn't like he didn't love them, but his decisions really hurt them. And so I wrote that to Steve with the trust that it didn't sound good. It didn't make me look like a good person, that here I am criticizing this fellow, poor guy who's in pain and is going to die soon. But I knew Steve would kind of take it as I meant it. And he gave me back an answer that was really, really important. Partly kind of a technical answer that pain medications do make people feel fuzzy. And so my brother-in-law's decision to not take pain medicine sometimes was related to him wanting to stay clear. Okay. But also that people do things that are not very nice when they're afraid. Mm-hmm. And both those responses from Steve were incredibly helpful to me on a practical level. But I think if I hadn't been wide open, honest, showing the ugliest side of myself by, laying out a criticism, it would have been hard to get the answer I needed from Steve, So, and sometimes he did the same thing. He said something that I didn't find very noble or whatever, but
hey, wait. I don't remember.
You are noble.
It was perfect. Come on. I read the book. Steve was always perfect. It was always you, Irene. No. But actually, I remember this. I remember because I remember the story of your brother-in-law because it was very, very intense. You described him, I believe, screaming on top of his lungs. And I remember reading this thing, and I was like, holy shit, it obviously is suffering. Obviously you're not in possession of all your means, and obviously you try to hold on to this life because it's and I remember that, but exactly what you said, you were authentic, you were authentic at this moment, at this writing, and you kept that, you didn't try to brush off and to look at the good person. I appreciate that. I appreciate this learning exercise because it's almost like we're learning with you, with this exchange. Absolutely. We learn that. So
if I could just add a little PS to that. Steve, in fact, I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but my sister Maria, with whom I'm still in very, very close touch on a regular basis, and she was a huge help to both Steve and me, with the book. But she shared with me an email that she had gotten from someone she hadn't seen in many, many years. And that woman had lost a daughter, a young daughter, a 12-year-old, to an illness. And she specifically cited that passage to my sister because she said, I remember my daughter screaming in pain and how worried I was that she was in pain. And the doctors kept telling me, no, she's not actually in pain. It's just some kind of neurological release. So that passage spoke to someone else who had been through really a tragic situation. And again, if I had tried to sugarcoat it and pretend that he wasn't screaming or that the screams were not very disturbing, I don't think that other woman, that stranger to me, could have had the benefit. So we're kind of getting this type of feedback from our various readers, that they do appreciate that we're honest with each other, that we go back and forth, that we change our minds. And our hope ultimately is not that they agree with us, but that they decide to launch their own conversations, sort of like you are doing, Olivier, with us. That's the hope, is let's launch conversations.
And that's actually important to me, because today this society is very death denial, even if you have more and more publication and books, but
death cafes.
Yeah.
Death cafes. The thing about that, the death denial thing, what we've been finding, at least I'll speak just for myself, what I've been feeling and talking with people is that there is a kind of a superficial, widespread denial of death and mortality.
Right.
But every time I start talking to people, you realize that there actually is a great interest in talking about it.
Absolutely.
And what is often missing is the place to do it or the entry to do it. How do we get started? Who do I have the conversation with? When Irene and I were first having that very first long conversation, what we started talking about was what each of us might be interested in writing sometime about this. And my interest, what I was saying, was that I just love the idea of telling stories, which is what I got to do a fair amount of in this book, and telling Irene stories through these emails. But it's really clear to me, and you were just saying, Olivia, the same thing about, we learn from this stuff. What we learn from is other people's stories. We hear the way other people experience these things. People in my family, my wife's mother, I mean, the way she went through the end of her life, I felt like I learned some things for myself from that. Sharing these stories, somewhat just inside myself first, but then putting them out there is a way to, I'm learning from them as I share them, and other people have the opportunity to hear my experiences and decide what among those they might want to take something from, or say, no, that's not for me. It's absolutely powerful stuff.
Absolutely. This, and you're right, I absolutely agree with you. When you start the conversation about it, people will react to that. There will be, yeah, but me too, something like they will open up.
Yeah, they react by telling a story. Almost all the time. They tell a story about somebody they know or they experienced.
And it's a fundamental subject. It's a fundamental topic to us because, look, we are all aware, and I think it's Sheldon Solomon, this psychiatric, I think, who said that if you're a kid or an idiot, every one of us are death aware. We know that we'll die at some stage, but it looks like that nobody is talking about that. In the media or the mass media, everything is very much like put into silence, and it's for us personally to figure it out. And this is what I like about these books, that we have, is you're not alone. It's to give something. It's to give like a support mechanism. And I would like to ask, for the listeners here. So what do we find in your book? What are the topics? What are you discussing about in this book? If you can give us a little bit of a summary here.
Well, we ended up organizing the book in chapters. And actually just carrying it out for the most part in chapters. It's just the way it happened to organize itself. But the chapters that we take up are things like one of my favorites actually is an early chapter about is death ever unjust or unfair? Because we hear people talk about, it's unfair that he got this or she got that, or that that person died at an early age. Is there such a thing as an unfairness or an unjustness about that? About what do I do with pain at the end of life? What about grieving? What about caregiving? What happens to my body and whatever else there is after I die? We try to have a number of categories, but even within those chapters, there are diversions, there are stories to tell, experiences to update each other on because of what's going on with Irene's family members throughout the course of the exchange, and then, I am constantly having experiences with my clients through this nonprofit that are just always informing my feelings and my beliefs. Or it's like I'm constantly being updated, like getting a new software all the time. There's something coming along all the time to sort of inform me in a little different way about what I think. One of the ways I often put it is that it's so important to write down or put out what you think you think. And when you share that with someone else and they come back with what they think, over time, what you think evolves. And I think we both feel like there was a tremendous evolution for both of us in the course of doing this writing.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
So actually, that's one of the questions that I would say. How did you change your minds along this way, or what did you learn yourself? How did it change you? What was this growth that I think you had?
We had so many that I don't know if you have enough time. We'll list a few. And I'll start with the first thing that came from the tapes that Steve shared with me, called Being with Dying by a woman named Joan Halifax. And Steve had been in an actual seminar with her, a couple of days worth, right, Steve?
About 9 days or something. It was a pretty intensive training out in New Mexico, yeah.
and the CDs, it's 6 of them. So it's really a lot of stuff. And one thing that really impressed me right away was that you can talk about death calmly. I think so many of us only either see the TV and media where it's hysterical death, whether, crying, someone's dying of an illness, or violent death, but it's always hysterical. So I was really impressed that she could just talk calmly about death. Yeah. And that was really important to me. And the other thing was compassion. That one of the big things about all being mortal is that at some point all of us will suffer emotionally, but probably also physically. And we can be compassionate with each other about that. And I think that's really another important lesson. In terms of things that I learned, I think, by talking with Steve specifically, I would mention again this idea that people usually do things that are not very nice because they're afraid, not because they're trying to not be nice or mean, but their fear gets turned into something else. That was a very important lesson to me. The balance with pain medication. We do have amazing pain medications, and it's very hard to get the balance right. So as my loved ones were getting closer and closer to death, there were a lot of major issues with pain. And I kept advocating, because of the work Steve and I had been doing, that their pain get treated adequately. But to have really severe end-of-life pain treated, you really need someone on the job, kind of, who's a very skilled professional. And that's not that easy to do. So that's one way our health system is failing us, is that the medications are there, but we don't have enough people who know how to use them properly. So what happens is people get over-medicated. My brother-in-law actually almost killed himself one time. He went into a coma for 13 days because he had taken too much pain medication. Mm-hmm. And then he went the other way, as the passage we were talking about before, where he didn't take enough, and so he was screaming. So that balance is really hard to get right. And I was very grateful, just as a little footnote before I turn it over to Steve, that when my own father died, I think we came as close to as we could. He had one kind of painful incident about 5 days before he died, and then we got different medications, and he was pretty peaceful from them until he actually passed. And it didn't require that much pain medication in his case, but it needed this fine-tuning that, lay people can't always be expected to know how to do. So those are some of the very many things I learned.
And before I ask Steve the same, actually, I have my co-host who is late, but he just pinged me and he said, "Can you add me on?" So I said, "Let me just giving shit, just to be late."
Okay.
But at the same time, Steve, I will let you talk after that.
Okay.
What can I say?
You fucker. This is what I will say to you. But that's okay.
I'm sorry. I went for a nap. I'd still got 3 o'clock lodged in my mind. And then when I saw your message, I'm like, I'll be there. Don't worry. Chill. It's 5 minutes yet.
Okay, can you apologize now to Irene and Steve, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah, Irene and Steve, I am mortified.
Right word.
We'll take that under advisement.
Probably a great use of the word under such circumstances. But I should have had an early client, and she cancelled it. Look, I'm even wringing my hands now in despair. That's how
okay, so shut up now. We could, but you missed a great intro because I insulted
again.
Yeah, I screwed up the intro. I insulted the right-wing Christians. Anyway, so sorry about what. And then Irene and then Irene told me that no.
I missed the insulting of the right-wing Christians.
Anyway, wait. Shut up now. Okay, sorry, Steve. You were thinking about your growth. Forgot. How did you grow yourself with this? Sorry about this, but this is what Tim's role is to do all this stuff.
Okay, well that's good to know. Thanks. I'm the journey here for me was to it felt like a constant reevaluating my what I thought So some of the stuff was some of what I feel like I've settled on after writing this book and doing all of this work with it is I felt like I landed pretty close to where I was, but with a much clearer understanding of why. So, I work so much with people who are very close to the end of life. I mean, very intimately with them, sitting next to them, putting my hands on them, doing massage with them, but even sometimes when they're not awake anymore. So I'm watching them, I'm watching their family, and I'm learning, what I might want to do for myself, and what I hope my family or friends will do for me. It feels to me like the process. I don't feel like I came out of it with anything that was completely new to me, but I feel like I understand what I was leaning toward before more than I had before. And, I mean, it's almost hard to explain it in any more detail than that.
So I have a question for you and
Irene's video on my screen, by the way, is frozen right now, unless she hasn't moved at all for the last several minutes. But
no, it's
good for me.
Good for me as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay. I got all of you guys in motion too.
That's great. That's great. So I have a question for you because
it'd be quite ironic if she died and it froze.
Yeah. Okay. Fuck. I really missed you.
We've been working on that one actually, Tim. I don't know if you read the end of the book, but Steve and I have been practicing.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Somebody somewhere on a Skype interview is going to die, and it's going to go viral, isn't it? And this is what
probably already has.
Probably
done already. Yeah.
Oh shit.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because for me, it's always difficult to when you have people and you bring the subject in the middle of dinner, if you have like a party with people and you bring this subject, everyone will say, oh, this is so depressing, let's not talk about that, but you have a chapter, and I've just opened on the book, which it's chapter 8, that says what's so great about mortality anyway. So Can we sell mortality to these people who are really don't want to talk about that? I don't know if we can do it.
Since you guys are both in Europe, I'll start with an anecdote. So I had a really beautiful friend in Switzerland who was a very talented photographer, a woman named Simone Obliger, and she had a friend who had been murdered also, and she wrote a very beautiful book about her friend who had been murdered, called L'amour mortel. And but when my friends were murdered, she was one of the few people who really said to me, Irene, if you want to talk about it, I'll listen. And in the course of that conversation with her, which I really appreciated because it was still very raw, speaking of raw, the loss was still very, very painful to me. She said something to me, and she said, well, I don't want to live forever. That's a horrifying thought. So I think part of it is just that it's hard to, eternity is hard for any human being to wrap his or her mind around. And I know those of us who have been with the very, very elderly see that most of them are not that happy. There are a few who are 100 plus who are happy, but most of them really say, can't wait till this is over. It was good while it lasted, but just can't wait till it's over. So on some basic level, I think if you really had to eat ice cream the rest of your life, you'd probably get sick of ice cream pretty fast. I think that life is beautiful, 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 but if it also has its sorrows, of course, and its pains. But I think if it went on forever, we'd be in trouble for all kinds of reasons, including resources. So I'll just close that part before Steve gets to the real reasons. That my brother, while I was working on this, and including suggesting the title Death for Dummies, which, we thought of seriously, but it wasn't taken up.
It's a great title. It's a great title.
But including that wonderful suggestion, he gave me a book that was a sci-fi book, and I'm really sorry because I don't have the title at the tip of my tongue, but one of us should probably be able to track it down. It was a novel where they discover how to get this blood transfusion, essentially, and then you don't die. And of course,
I think that was a Robert Heinlein novel.
I don't think that was the guy's name.
I read a Robert Heinlein novel with that. It was about the lead character was somebody named Lazarus.
No, that's great. No, it's a different one. It's really sci-fi.
You're thinking of the Bible.
Yeah, I get that mixed up with books all the time.
I know. Me too. It's easy mistake to make. Don't worry about
how
it.
people, they try to control this treatment to make you immortal. And of course it eventually leaks out and everybody's living forever. So very quickly there's not enough water, there's not enough food, it really turns into a kind of nightmare situation. So if you really wrapped your mind around us living like we live, but just not dying, it'd be a problem. So
my whole financial future will be fucked, to be quite frank. It's all based around on all people I know dying and leaving me money. So that wouldn't work at all.
Yeah, I was hoping for that too, but there's nobody in my immediate circle. I'm still trying to find somebody I can get close to right before they die. I haven't managed it.
Well, you're wasting your time with me and Olivier, so
okay. I'm not sure I can explain this thought very well because it's something that keeps sort of forming and then unforming in my head, but I've got a very clear idea, at least a sense of the idea that our lives are there. It's a built-in arc. Everything that happens to us is part of an arc that comes to an end. And so, I mean, even if we're not thinking about the fact that we're going to die, the rhythm or the arc of our life is all based on the truth that we're going to die. And so, awareness of that, incorporating it doesn't mean becoming obsessed with it or becoming, I think, Olivia, you said becoming, goth, getting into wearing black and
like Tim does right now.
Oh yeah, black, right? Oh, it looks good on Tim. It looks perfect on Tim. But that's that I just have this sense that the awareness of it is a quiet companion that you bring with you all the time is going to change the way you live. So that's to me that's one of the other working titles we had for this book was The Gift of Mortality. Which, if it doesn't end up being the title of the book, at least is in my mind a really good concept. It's something that gives a lot to us all the time. It's a gift that keeps on giving until one day.
I mean, here's something else really concrete that maybe could be helpful to your listeners. When I did lose my friends so suddenly, it just brought the truth about mortality so powerfully home to me because I had seen Susanna on Friday and she was dead 12 hours later, and what did I do with that? I mean, in addition to the grief and the numbing and all that stuff that happens, I realized that my next moment might be, or this moment might be my last moment. And that really helped me make some choices about how I wanted to live in the moment. So I'll give you a great example was being in a grocery store checkout line and being annoyed because someone in front of you is taking too much time or what you think is too much time.
Or maybe there's 12 items in the 10-item aisle.
Right. There you go.
Those people should die, actually.
Exactly.
Should die.
So you're standing there and you're feeling annoyed. And I remember thinking to myself that summer after I had lost my friends in just that situation, wow, if this is my last moment on earth, I don't want to be feeling annoyed. Let me figure out something positive to be focusing on right now. And I know that can sound Pollyanna, and you two are not into Pollyanna, and I appreciate that. But the reality is, do you want to be annoyed or you want to be doing something positive that feels good to you? So a lot of times I've found that knowing that this could be my last moment or my penultimate moment really allows me to make a better choice about just where I'm putting my energy, my thought, my love. It's been great. It's a good mood corrector.
And I don't think that's Pollyanna, actually. I really don't think that's Pollyanna thinking. I think it's common sense. I think Pollyanna thinking is just, you're taking a situation that's actually happening to you and actually trying to look at it in a different way. Pollyanna thinking to me is where we try to deny a situation and pretend it's not happening to us. Do you know what I mean? So I'm in full agreement to that, and then I would love to be able to snap my fingers, have the ability to do that, and not get annoyed with my lawn guy because he started doing the lawn outside my window just as I did my last client call,
Can you think about
anyway,
death,
Steve,
man?
I think.
Think about death, breathe. Don't be annoyed. Don't be annoyed.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got Bauhaus.
Change your shirt and change your life. Isn't that a bumper sticker somewhere?
Cool. That's good.
I want to just return to something that Irene was talking about older folks too. Is I remember when I was a fairly young newspaper writer, and I went to interview this elderly couple in a nearby town. They were in their 80s, and I think I was interviewing them because they were about to celebrate their 60-something anniversary, and we had this really delightful conversation. But towards the end of it, one of them said, "And we're not really looking to live much longer. We're not. I mean, I have no interest in being 90." And I've had other people say that to me since then too. But it was the first time, and I was probably around 30. It was the first time I'd ever had anybody express the notion that death could come and be perfectly fine, that they were gonna be perfectly okay with letting go, and in fact they would be less than okay if it didn't happen.
But do you think it's real actually? Because in theory, like from a thinking process, people can say that, but when you are really confronted to this happening, do you think that they will be that comfortable with the idea?
Well, I think those are two different things. I think you're talking about the concept of being willing to embrace the fact that you're going to die.
Yeah.
But exactly how you end up dying, if it's painful, that'll change the moment. That moment, if you're it'll suddenly come clear to you that you're not only dying, but you're leaving the person you've been with for 65 or whatever years, and that can be painful, and you can be thinking not just about your own loss, but they're losing you. I mean, none of this is to suggest that it ends up being wonderful or enjoyable, but it's still a process. It's still something that can be embraced and accepted because of the work you can do and the thinking that you do ahead of time.
Yeah, so Steve and I can offer you a really concrete example because 1 year ago, I got a cancer diagnosis, and we looked at each other, and on some level we had to laugh. We said, here we are finishing this book about mortality, and one of us gets a cancer diagnosis. Now, I can share with you quite honestly, maybe without being hysterically funny, but when I heard that news, I was very sad. I mean, I burst into tears, and I both expected it and was shocked. It's a weird feeling to both think, oh yeah, why not me? It's my time, and to also just be, what, me? I mean, it's simultaneously to feel those two things. And before much was clarified about, what kind of cancer, what kind of potential treatment, how widespread was it, and all of that, I definitely put myself through the paces about what if my life is over in a few months. Now, fairly quickly, it became clear that that was unlikely. But in that moment, you think to yourself, am I ready? Right? Am I ready to go right now? Like right now, the four of us are kind of looking at each other, and is one of us ready to leave, in 30 minutes?
Absolutely not.
I mean, I hope not.
One of you two, please.
Right. Okay. So, there's this kind of thing of, okay, well, I don't feel quite ready yet. If it is my moment, how am I going to do it? And I think one of the points that Steve and I make in this book and with audiences we've talked with is it's great to make a plan, and it won't necessarily go according to that plan. But having made the plan, there's a really good chance you're going to be able to have a better death than you would otherwise. And I think I'll go back to that painful example with my brother-in-law. I think that whatever choices I might make about pain medication would have some echo of what I learned from what he and his family went through. Or differently, I think that there are certain kinds of treatments that I might say no to because I know I will die, and I know I've had a really full, great life, right? So as I put it to Steve very soon after I got the diagnosis, I'm really not interested in going anytime soon, but if I have to, it'll be okay. you know? And that doesn't preclude, to get back to Steve's point, it doesn't preclude moments of panic. There were, especially in those first months, a lot less now. But in those first months, I remember thinking, and I heard I'm allowed to curse on this show, so I'll give
actually,
you.
you're lacking you're lacking of cursing right now.
Yeah.
We need to.
So here's the actual quote. The actual quote is, "Oh shit, I don't want to have cancer." I mean, that's.
Well, I don't think you can say that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's too much, Irene. Come on.
Yeah. Come on.
You can't do better than that.
Okay, thanks for the encouragement. But my second thought was, that's ridiculous. Why not? People get cancer all the time. Okay, you see what I mean? So I think it's okay to have whatever those emotional reactions are going to be. But the real maturity, the real grace of living is what you do next after you have that kind of initial emotional reaction. And I tried to just put all the love out there I could put out. And one of the ways I did that, just to be as entertaining as someone like me can be, which is not very, when I would go to the hospital, which I did a lot in that period, I would get dressed to the nines. I would you think Olivier was commenting on my jewelry and glasses before, Tim. You didn't get a chance to do that.
I was abusing her,
I wore these especially for you guys. But when I would go to the hospital, I would have a hat. I would have gloves. I would have jewelry. I was made up. I have fancy clothes. I had crazy stockings, because I thought whoever sees me as I'm in this hospital space, I want them to either laugh or smile. I don't want them to get depressed. There's enough depression around here already. So there are kind of concrete things you can do when you take that proactive stance towards your own potential demise.
It's interesting because I lost my mother-in-law to pancreatic cancer 2 months ago.
I'm sorry.
I've lost 3 friends to pancreatic cancer in the last 8 months, and it's a pretty brutal diagnosis because the clear-up rate is the worst. It's pretty much that and liver cancer. And she refused treatment, because she felt so good at the time, and she's got 2 grandkids who they lived with. They'd just come back from Australia for 4 years, and she wanted to spend the time, quality time, and the deterioration of her from when she passed away, which was the end of January, from Christmas Day. We've got pictures where my wife went back home at Christmas and left me here in the US, and she looks fantastic, and she looks herself, and she was a very glamorous lady. My sister-in-law is a model. She used to be a model herself, and it's kind of like, they were saying, well, she should take the treatment, she should take the chemo, but they knew the chemo was only palliative. It was only going to extend. And it wasn't, and the quality of her life was going to deteriorate dramatically, because the quality of her life would deteriorate from the moment she began the chemo, as opposed to, she knew she got a certain amount of months, weeks or months of good quality, and then it would just drop off a cliff. Whereas opposed to if she started the chemo, her quality of life would deteriorate immediately. Not usually, it's the second or third round of chemo before it starts to deteriorate. But, and it's interesting you're saying that, because you remind me a lot of my mother-in-law, and that's exactly how she was. She would just, she'd still boss the nurses around and go in and do her own thing. And a family couldn't understand that. And I'm not sure that I could until you just explained it like that, in thinking it's like, well, fuck it, I'm going to do it on my terms. Mm-hmm. If it's going to happen.
That's such an individual thing. And so what's going to inform that decision that everybody makes? It's going to be a clear idea of who you are and what you want, and about how you live and about how you die. And it's a little bit off that, but I'm thinking of a woman I just worked with recently through my nonprofit, which, Tim, is a program that does massage therapy or massage with people who are dying of cancer. And this woman was, late 40s, 3 kids, teenagers, single mom, and she was getting very close to the end of her life. And she had some wonderful caregivers family and in particular, a couple of friends. But the first time I arrived at her house to do this massage with her, they were involved in this rather intense discussion. And the woman told me about it later, that she was actually pretty unhappy with them briefly because they kept pushing her to take more pain medication. They saw that she was in increasing pain, and they wanted her to stop. They wanted her to have that pain go away. She was not taking the pain medication because she knew that pain medication strong enough to take the pain that she had was going to affect her clarity, her ability to do things. And she still very concretely wanted to be able to pick her son up from hockey practice. It was that simple. She wanted to be mom. And it was a matter of a few days before the pain was too great and she could no longer do that. But that was a decision she had to make. She had to arrive at it based on what was important to her, the kind of person she was, the kind of mother she was. She eventually, when she died in the incredibly loving care of a handful of people, which, we could all hope to have the kind of end of life that she had. But she had to have it happen the way she wanted.
Mm-hmm. And I think, to the point of your show and your efforts in general, and Steve and I are grateful for that, if you think you're not going to die, or if you think it's possible to just keep postponing it, it's hard to make those kinds of decisions, So that's another gift of mortality, is when you have the clarity that it will come to an end, I think you can make some choices about how, when, to a certain extent, what you're going to be busy doing until then. And yeah, about chemo, I have the same feeling. If you know that chemo has a chance of giving you good quality of life for a reasonable period of time afterwards, of course it might make sense, But if it's going to affect your quality of life in the only amount of time you have left, that's a different story. And I think one of my campaigns at this stage is to help lay people who are not in the medical caring professions, understand better what their choices are really about. And that's what palliative medicine is in the U.S. And Steve and I are lucky to be in a region that has a great palliative care department at our local hospital. But lots of places in the country don't have that. And I think step one, you have to understand that you really are mortal. And step two, you have to get the information from your doctors that really can give you the straight talk about what the treatment might cost you and what you could expect to get because you've had the treatment. And a lot of people never get that straight talk because doctors don't want to talk about death either. They want to succeed.
It's like if once you've decided that you're not going to, once they realize that you're not going to survive your cancer or other illness, doctors tend to check out. People often lose them, But to carry on forward, I think Irene's point a little bit. Back in the fall, shortly after the book came out, we co-wrote a column that appeared on a National Public Radio blog. And it was, about the topic of the book. And then after it appears, there are, many dozens of comments from readers. Some of
hundreds. Steve, there were hundreds of comments.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, I think it was millions, if I remember.
Billions.
Right.
Billions. That's famous.
I commented 14 times.
Yeah, exactly. Me too, as well. That was me.
Yeah. But I just remember some of these people who post things on comments online really should have their computers taken away. But this one person said something like, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to death, I'm just going to wing it. And my thought about that was, okay, if you're lucky enough to be hit by a bus, then great. You have a heart attack or a stroke and you're dead before you hit the floor, then that's going to work out really well for you. But what if what if there actually is, like most of us will have an approach to the end of our life, some kind of, at least, weeks or months, if not more. So, if you've never really done this before, if you've never thought about it, then the decisions and the if it's suddenly a surprise that, oh, holy crap, I'm going to die. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot where I am. Holy shit, I'm going to die.
Holy fuck, come on.
Holy fuck, that would be the right
holy
level.
Fuck, I'm going to die. Yeah, then it's going to make it a whole lot harder process. But there's another side of that. What if it's not you? What if it's your spouse or, who has the stroke or the heart attack or has the cancer or something like that? And they're the ones who are going to die in weeks or months or whatever. and you've never thought about it. You've never processed what it means. I mean, I mentioned this in the book. I said in the book, 2 granddaughters. I've got 3 granddaughters now, and a son, and a daughter-in-law, and a wife, and I have imagined the deaths of all of them, not the act of the death, not how they died, but just the loss. I've tried to think ahead. What would it be like to lose any one of those? And it's really a hard exercise, but it also, I think, keeps me grounded to the fact that it could happen to anybody. We don't get born.
I was going to say, will happen.
Yeah. Okay. I meant anybody at any time. At any moment, it could be any person. And we don't get born with the guarantee that we're going to live to be 76.2 years. Years old. That's just not the way it works. Some people die very young. Some people die much older. And, that awareness, it's the cliche that we've developed. I mean, it was already one, but we've made it one if it wasn't. If you do this work, it might change the way you die, and it will change the way you live.
Can I tell you a secret, guys? Because nobody's listening.
I'm just going to lean in so I can hear this. Yeah.
Okay, so my wife's she's almost finished a doctorate in oncology, and she's worked as a nurse in oncology for 25 years. A good deal of that time was in palliative care. So you were talking about palliative care, and she loves palliative care. Yet she is probably the most ill-equipped person to deal with death that I know. And I can't get my head around it. She's dealing with it all the time. She comes back. She's the kind of nurse that is in tears when patients that she's been working with for 4 or 5 years or whatever die. When she knows straight away, as soon as she starts dealing with them, that's how it's going to end. And I would love to be able to, because in the medical profession, you seem to, you're saying, Steve, about doctors checking out, they have to come to Jesus speech. And often they'll put them, there are only, going back to chemo, there are only about 4 or 5 different types of cancer where chemo works effectively. The rest of it is just longevity or palliative care. And they know that, and yet they'll put them on chemo and lengthen their life because it makes their stats look better, because it makes them look like they've got a more successful rate of keeping people alive. And
5-year survival rate.
Yeah, and also nobody wants to tell somebody that they're dying. They like I say, they talk about it all the time. Ellen says at least once a week about the Come to Jesus speech. Nobody wants to do it, and it's kind of like ironic, to me, that we're here talking about this when this should be a conversation. And I'm saying should be, probably is a conversation that's going on within a medical profession that always seems to be behind the 8 ball to me. Always seems to be, one step removed from where they should be, where doctors are taught to disassociate from clients, because if they don't, then emotionally they're going to become wrecks themselves if they get upset. But like I say, my wife's she's been in oncology. I'm actually not exactly sure, but it's well over 20 years, nearly 25 years, and she gets upset, but she recovers. And that's
that
her way
doesn't
of
seem
dealing
ill-equipped to me. That seems actually pretty healthy. I
I
only have the information you've given me, but based on what you're saying, that to become, people ask me all the time, how do I do the work I do with people who die sometimes within days or weeks or months of when I meet them, and it helps to know going into it, this person is going to die fairly soon. It changes the ground that the relationship is built on, but it can still be really hard. To me, that seems like a really healthy way to go about it, to really feel it.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. Sorry, Irene, go on.
No, I just wanted to, I'm not trying to defend doctors, believe me, but I do think we can only control ourselves, possibly, and so I'm always one to ask the question, what do we need to do, right? And I think that another part of this, wrap your mind around mortality and why it is a gift, is because when you get into a situation like that, as the patient, but also as Steve was saying, if you get into that situation about a spouse or someone you're responsible for, a child or a parent, then you know to ask the doctor, about, is this actually going to help, right? Is this going to give her a chance at a period in her life where she's going to feel good again? And what happens to a lot of doctors, I should identify that I've been following a palliative care doctor in our local hospital for about a year. And I mean, I don't get to go there all the time, but it's been very meaningful experience. And just a couple of weeks ago, one of the people who suddenly had non-specified metastatic cancer. They couldn't figure out the origin, but cancer was all over her body, and she definitely was not going to have long to live. And she had just gotten this news about 10 days before. So she was facing this chemo question. And the idea was that the chemo could possibly have her feeling strong enough to leave the hospital and just maybe have a couple of days at home. It wasn't clear if that would happen. And they said they'd know within about 2 weeks of the chemo. They would know if it was likely to help her get stronger. So to me, that seems like an okay situation if everybody's up in the know, so to speak. Sure. But if it really is just a matter of prolonging days where you're going to feel absolutely awful, I think patients have a right to know. But often doctors offer it because patients and their families especially do not want to think that the guy or woman could die. They just want, they say,
or that people didn't do everything they could.
Yeah, because they very seldom distinguish between palliative and curative chemo, and they will tell people they'll give them chemo without telling them that it's really just palliative chemo and that it's just going to extend life rather than actually cure the cancer itself. And I think that's a major issue. And I think it comes back to what I was saying, that people don't like to tell other people you're dying. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing we can do about it. It must be one of the most helpless things that you can do to somebody. Say, there's nothing we can do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not always as simple as. I mean, I think Irene was making this point some too. It's easy to get to overgeneralizing in this, but there are chemos. I mean, I've known lots of people who've been on chemo, and it made them feel kind of crappy. A fairly typical regimen will be chemo once every 3 weeks. And so for the first week after you have it, you kind of feel like crap. And then the second week, you're getting stronger and feeling better. And the third week, you feel kind of like your old self for the most part. And then you go through it again. And you do this over the course of months, maybe longer. A lot of people would look at that and say, man, I don't want to feel like shit 1/3 of my life for the rest of my life. But other people would say, man, I've got this horrible disease, but they can give me this drug that'll make me feel pretty good for 1/3 and not bad for another third and just crap for the last third. I'll take that. I mean, it's not always as simple as just if you take this chemo, you're going to have a horrible quality of life. Sometimes it's a sucky quality of life, but you'll take it in order to not leave the world in which your spouse, children, grandchildren, friends live in.
Whereas other people might say, it's not worth it to me. I mean, if they had actually explained to me better what I was going to go through with the surgery and the radiation, I'm not sure I would have signed up, actually. I love my doctors, and I think they did a good job. But you know what? It does suck. I mean, it's really, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of indignity. There's a lot of consequences that they don't tell you about, maybe because it doesn't happen to everybody. I'm not sure. But I think our point, Steve and me, is if you think about it beforehand, you're just more like you have a better shot at thinking clearly when suddenly you find that yourself in that situation. So if you put yourself through these mental exercises a bit beforehand, you got a better chance. And we think it's worth that better chance. We think it's worth it.
Go ahead.
No, and I just wanted to add, but to get back to a point Olivier made that I couldn't agree with more, it doesn't mean that you spend your whole life thinking about death. even after the cancer, I didn't do that.
Olivier does.
Even in those.
I presume he's confessed that he just spent his entire life thinking about death.
No,
yeah, but I gather he's actually mostly thinking about yours.
Yeah. Because of irritancy. Anyway, so that's fine.
What I was going to say, sort of a comical downside, if that's the way to put it, about this sometimes is I've spent so much time thinking about this, reading about it, and just being literally hands-on people who are dealing with this, that I sometimes find myself going a little too far down the road, and sometimes I can't get a hangnail without thinking, oh my God, I might have cancer. I sprained my ankle a week ago, and I'm thinking, oh my God, is that something really worse? Or it's just, I have to reel myself in sometimes. But I feel like I have the tools to do that, to bring perspective, and even sometimes carry that thought forward. I mean, I realize, okay, it's just a hangnail. I don't have cancer, but what if it is? Then I can kind of go through this little process. If I do have cancer, this is what it would mean, and this is these are the conversations I would have to have with people. I can let it go after that. But it sometimes kind of amuses me to realize how quickly my mind goes to some of the worst possibilities for me, just based on things that aren't really all that important.
Tim is just like that, by the way.
Yeah, marry a nurse. I mean, before the internet, I was a hypochondriac. Since the internet arrived, I'm a raging hypochondriac. I mean, WebMD is my homepage. It's like, oh my God, it's this, it's that. I have a condition called hemochromatosis, which means you've got too much iron in my blood. And normally the first indication of that is pancreatic cancer. But they found it in a routine blood test.
They found it without even an acute pancreatitis or anything?
Yeah, they just found it. My ferritin levels were through the roof, and they started giving me phlebotomies about 6-7 years ago. I have a monthly phlebotomy that keeps the ferritin level down now, and I'm the times I think about that now, says the man drinking a beer and who's wondering, is there going to be a 2-minute gap where I can go and grab another one? Who's worried about his liver at the same time. But I also think that, and you've kind of alluded to this, and obviously I apologize that I missed, the first half of the conversation, but you can't spend all your time thinking, well, this equals that, or this is that, or that, I've got to give everything up, because there was a movement that I'm not sure if you're aware of, probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, that started up, where people were determined to demonstrate that you could live forever. Right. That if you removed all these certain things, these certain toxins and processed foods and whatever, that it was actually possible to live forever. Because
there was a name for that, wasn't it? Like transhumanists or?
I think the name for it was fucking idiots. I think it was fuckingidiots.com, and I could be wrong on that. That's a Latin term, I think. But it's just like going back to what I'm looping back to what we were saying about 10 minutes ago. Why would you want to? Why would you want to see everybody that you know die, and other people come and then die, and as you get weaker and weaker? I mean, because the body atrophies. The body, no matter, even if you can technically live forever. Have you ever seen a 100-year-old, sprinting down the street to catch a bus or whatever? It really, maybe you have, maybe somebody has.
Okay, man. You go to the point, man.
No, the point is, I just wanted to set you up so I could go and grab another beer.
Okay.
So,
But
well, I wanted to ask if we had time for one very different topic, if that's possibly okay.
Actually, we just passed the hour, but if we can, if you want to wrap with us.
I just wanted to talk about one other gift of mortality that I experienced myself, because I know in Britain there's a green burial movement, and I think that I really salute that. And in the U.S. it's gaining ground. And we have a woman in our area who's gives seminars about green burial, kind of dispelling. It's worse in the U.S. than in Europe, but this idea that you should be embalmed.
Yeah.
And that puts incredible poisons into the ground, right? And a lot of American cemeteries, you have to have a vault, right? So a concrete vault. So that puts all this concrete into the ground. You know, it's all these crazy things. So she's made a campaign out of helping people understand that the laws don't require either of those things, for example. I mean, an individual cemetery might say you need a vault because they want to be able to cut the grass, believe it or not. That's the main reason, so that the grave doesn't sink and it stays nice and even. But when people learn these kinds of things, they could make a different choice about it. And the funeral industry in the U.S. is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And people are told in those horrible moments of grief that you should do this is required, blah, 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 blah. You need a really expensive casket. Don't you want to show how much you loved so-and-so, you know? When there are all these other choices. But if you haven't wrapped your mind around mortality, if you haven't thought about it before, you don't really have a choice. You're very vulnerable, for sure, in those moments when you've just lost somebody. And funeral directors have a lot of experience. I don't mean to imply that they are all crooks, but a certain number of them are mainly thinking about the bottom line.
Well, they're definitely into the upsell.
Well, one of the richest people I know is the guy who buried my mum, and she was buried just literally about. I'm not sure if you know that I live in America now. But I was obviously I'm from England, but when she passed away about 5 years ago, she was buried about 400 yards up the road. And me and my sisters were sat talking. I've got two sisters. We're saying that the funeral car and the course is going to cost this amount of money. And I said, well, why don't we just carry her up?
Yeah. And where we live, you're allowed to put the body in your own car.
Yeah.
But you have to have a permit. So you just need to know that you're allowed to do it and who to get the permit from. Oh. So it's a lot of information that I think is great for people to have. And so we have some information about that in our book too. And I would just add that when my own father died, I had already talked to my mother about taking care of his body after his death ourselves. And that's exactly what we did. And the reason I partly wanted to mention it now is when I tell people that, some people flip out. They're like, what? You watched your father? You know? And I realize that if it's the first time they're ever hearing of such a thing, it sounds outrageous, right? But if you've heard about it before, if you know other people who have done it, it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had in my life to be able to take care of my father at the end. So I just was hoping to sneak that in because sorry that it's a nonsense.
I think it's good actually, and I would invite the listeners to read one of the book by Kathleen Doughty, which is called Smoke in the Eyes, I believe, and Kathleen Doughty is a mortician, and she has a very funny YouTube channel which is called Ask a Mortician, and in her book she talks all about that. You know, she wants to change the funeral industry, and she said that she wants to bring death more closer to everyone, because before you had the corpse was present, when and it was present in the house for a couple of days, and people will mourn and come, and you'll have all this process. And now we just shut our eyes and don't want to look at that. It's just like it's very clinical. But because it starts to be clinical, we are losing something about us. And I would like to
literally clinical. It's all it takes place in the hospital. I mean,
and we don't want to see.
And we don't die at home now die in the hospital.
And this is why I think you're here. Because this conversation that we're having, I truly believe we need to have it again. You said something very right at the very beginning. It's when you talk about death, there's compassion going, and today in today's world we need compassion. When you see the state of the world, where you have this death denial culture, where you have to be the strongest, the fastest, and you need to have money and to be forever young. This is what we need today. We need to have compassion in order to live better. I think this is what the world needs. And by the way, I would like to add something about these immortality things. The transhumanism movement is still operating, by the way. This quest of immortality. And you have Aubrey de Grey, for instance, that just released a statement that will say that the first man who will live to 1,000 years old is born today. So for him, we'll have, so the
it's not Donald Trump.
Yeah. But this is fucking bullshit to me. This is fucking bullshit. Because
I would go along with Trump doing that if they did the whole thing they did. What was it? The baseball player Ted Williams, where they didn't they put his head into cold storage somewhere so they could revive him at some point in the future?
I've heard that about Walt Disney and various other people, but Donald Trump, I'd rather put him into cold storage now and then let's see what we can do in 1,000 years' time. That would make more sense to me.
But the ultimate point to me is, even if you live 2,000 years, at some stage you'll die in any case, right? Because this is what will happen to me, and this is part of our humanity, I guess. So anyway, that was my long outro or whatever, but just to say thank you guys for being here. It's actually one of the longest podcasts that we had, because this is a very interesting subject,
And besides, there were two of us.
I was late.
Okay, thank you both very much. It's a real honor and a pleasure to meet you. And
Absolutely.
I'm glad
it's been really good. Thank you very much.
And sorry for the glasses thing and the jewelry, Irene. You look gorgeous. You're gorgeous.
Well, I was gonna say it anyway, so I'm glad you said it first.
Yeah. No offense taken.
I'm turning up late because he'd forgotten we've moved it to 2:30.
No, you're not. No, you. I'm just still blaming you.
Hey, just a quick question. When does this appear? When does this show up?
Give us a week or two.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent.
Thanks so much.
So
all right. Bye.
We can stop.